The betrayal Khazar lay in the dirt, struggling to breathe the thick gray. Clouds above swirled in the sky, casting a dim, lifeless glow over the battlefield. The ground was soaked in mud and blood, a mixture of rain, and the fall in her body ACH her armor shattered. Her limbs' heavy pain flared through her ribs as she tried to move a deep wound. Ran along her side, and her left arm was useless. Her black and silver armor once. The pride of a Zalor warrior was cracked and broken. She had fought hard, she had done her duty, but in the end it was not the enemy who had defeated her, it was her own people. Her mind replayed the last moments before she fell to battle. Had been fierce Zelfar against humans. They had crushed the humans' defenses. Storming the ruined city, burning their camps. Victory was near. Then came the A. Strike human reinforcements, bombing the battlefield, turning it into fire and death. The ground had split, buildings had crumbled, and chaos had swallowed them. All Khazari had been hit, thrown hard against a pile of rubble. When she awoke, she saw her captain, Commander Vasek, standing above. Her relief had washed over her, but then she noticed something in his cold yellow eyes. Not concerned, not duty, disgust, unfit for battle, he had muttered. She tried to rise, but her legs failed. Help me, she had said, reaching out a trembling hand. Vasek only sneered. Survival of the strongest, he had said. The weak have no place in the Dominion. She could only watch as he turned and walked away. One by one the other excel. Far followed him, none looked back, none offered a hand. They left her die now. She was alone, abandoned the great Dominion that had raised or trained her, taught her that she was a proud warrior. They had thrown her away like trash. Khazar clenched her teeth, rage boiling in her chest. She would not die here. She would not let their betrayal be the end of her. A sound echoed through the battlefield, footsteps. Her heart pounded. Human, she forced her body to move, dragging herself toward the nearest wreckage for cover, but her strength was fading fast. She could barely lift herself. The footsteps grew closer, heavy. Boots, armor, a soldier, shadow moved through the smoke and dust. A human figure, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a rifle. Carrie's breath hitched. She knew what came next. Execution. Humans did not take Zar prisoners her people had made. Sure that Zalor warriors never surrendered, never showed mercy. The humans had learned to return that cruelty. She braced herself for the end. The human stepped into view. He wore battle-scarred armor marked with dirt and blood. A helmet covered his head, but his face was visible, rough, scared, his dark eyes scanning the battlefield. A predator searching for threats. Then his gaze landed on her. Carrie's breathing slowed, her muscles tensed, even broken. She would not beg. The human raised his rifle a second past 2-3. He didn't fire. Instead, he lowered the weapon. Khazari blinked in confusion. What was this? A trick? Humans were killers, no different from her own kind. He should have shot her and moved on, but he didn't. The human sidestepping closer, his expression hardened, like he was fighting with himself. Then, without a word, he knelt beside her. She flinched, weak or not. She would not let him humiliate her before the kill. She forced a snarl, baring her sharp teeth to it. She spat, voice rough from pain. Into the human didn't reply. Instead, he reached out a hand. Khazar froze. This was impossible. No human would offer mercy. No Sarwood accepted her pride, screamed at her to refuse, to spit in his face, but her body was broken. Her people had abandoned her. She had no options left. Her vision blurred, her strength faded. Survival of the strongest fine. With a trembling hand, she took as the last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a human, lifting her up, carrying her away from death of humans. Mercy. Khazari drifted between darkness and pain, the scent of burning metal land. Wet earth filled her lungs, but it was the ache in her body that tethered her to the waking world. Every breath was fire. Every movement sent sharp spikes of agony through her ribs. She was alive, but she did not know why. The last thing she remembered was the human. His face was still burned into her mind, scarred, rough, but not cruel. His dark eyes had studied her like she was some kind of puzzle, something he wasn't sure how to handle. And then he had saved her. Kerr's eyes fluttered open. The first thing she noticed was a dim orange glow of a fire flickering against the metal walls of a ruined structure. She was inside some kind of wreckage, a collapsed building, perhaps reposed into a temporary shelter. The cold wind howled outside, carrying the distant sounds of battle far away. She shifted slightly and immediately regretted it. A groan escaped her lips as pain surged through her side. Her armor was gone, stripped away, leaving only the thick underlayer of her combat suit. A bandage wrapped around her ribs, crude but tight the wound had been treated. That's when she noticed in the human sat a few feet away, rifle resting across his lap. He was watching her, silent, his expression unenrivaled. His Helmet was off now, revealing short dark hair streaked with sweat and dusta. Fire light deep in the shadows under his eyes caused her tense she was weak. Wounded, but she refused to show fear. Her claws flexed instinctively even though. She knew she had no strength left to fight. "You're awake," the human said his. Voice rough but calm, she narrowed her eyes. "You didn't kill me," a dry smirk tugged at the human's lips. Know why she demanded. The human let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "That's a good question." Kazair studied him his uniform was different from the others she had fought. He bore no high-ranking insignia, no markings of command, just another soldier, but he had made a choice that went against everything she had been told about humans. "You're a FO fool," she muttered. The human chuckled. Probably silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows against the walls. The warmth did little to ease the deep cold in Kazu's bones. "What's your name?" the human asked. Suddenly she stiffened. A name was not something lightly given, not among her kind. Names held weight, meaning to share it with an enemy was a sign of weakness or respect. She hesitated, then grudgingly she said, "Kazair." The human nodded. "Daniel Hayes." Surge more silence she expected him to ask more questions, to demand something of her, but he didn't. He just sat there watching the fire's expression. Unreadable. Cater's stomach twisted. Her body was weak, but hunger noted her. The last time she had eaten was before the battle. She would not beg, but her survival instincts clouded her, demanding sustenance. Hayes must have noticed. He reached into a pouch at his side, pulling out a small silver package. He tossed it toward her. It landed near her arm. Kazair eyed it suspiciously. "Poison?" she asked flatly. Hayes snorted. "Yeah, I saved your life just to kill you with a protein bar." She glared at him, but said nothing. Carefully she picked up the package and peeled it open. The scent was unfamiliar, grainy, synthetic, but it was food. She bit into it, forcing herself to chew despite the dry texture. Hayes washed her with amusement. "Not to your taste." She swallowed hard. "It is disgusting." "Welcome to human rations," he said, shaking his head. Kazair had eaten worse in war. She finished it, ignoring the way her body craved more. She shifted, her WBS flaring again. Too weak to fight, too weak to escape. If Hayes decided to turn on her, she wouldn't stand a chance. She had seen humans execute her kind before. A bullet to the head, a blade across the throat. Quick, efficient, merciless, but Hayes had done none of those things. He had saved her. Kazair did not know what to make of that. "Where are the others?" she asked. Haas expression dark and dead, or scattered. He didn't elaborate. Kazair frowned. If he was alone, that meant he had no reason to keep her alive. No orders, no witnesses. Just his own choice that unsettled her more than anything. "You regretted?" She guessed saving me. Hayes didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring into fire. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Not yet." Kazari didn't know what to say to that. She had expected cruelty. She had expected pain. Instead, she was left with a human who had no reason to spare her, yet did anyway, and she had no idea why, but she would find out even if it killed her unlikely allies. Kazari woke to the sound of distant gunfire. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her instinct screamed danger, and she tried to sit up only for sharp pain to explode. Through her ribs, a growl rumbled in her throat as she clenched her teeth. Weakness was unacceptable, but right now it was her reality. The small shelter of wreckage around her was dim lit only by the dying embers of the fire. The human Hayes was sitting nearby, cleaning his rifle with slow practiced movements. His helmet rested beside him, and his face was unreadable in the shadows. She had slept in the presence of an enemy. The realization sent a wave of unease through her. The Xylar warriors did not let their guard down, not even around their own kind, and yet here she was, alive, untouched, unchanged. She forced herself to sit up despite the pain. Watching Hay Worley relax, he muttered without looking at her, "If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it. While you were snoring." Kazori bristled. "I do not snore." Hay smirked, but didn't argue. She studied him. There was something about his demeanor, calm, efficient, but wary. He wasn't afraid of her, but he wasn't careless either. He was a soldier, the survivor, much like herself. Her gaze flicked to the rifle in his hands. He was preparing for something. The fighting, she said. "It's getting closer." Hay sighed. "Yeah, and that's a problem." Carrie's claws flexed against the ground. A problem for him, or for me. She needed to understand his motives. She still didn't know why he had saved her. Humans did not spare Sealer warriors, and yet he had not only saved her, he had treated her wounds, given her food. It made no sense. "You risk yourself to save an enemy," she said. Hayes exhaled slowly. "You ask a lot of Questions caused her narrowed her eyes, and you give very few answers, Hayes shrugged. Guess I'm just a bad conversationalist. She let out a slow breath, fine, if he wouldn't explain. Himself, she would find her own answers. She needed to test him, you expect. Gratitude, she said coldly. Hayes snorted. Not really. That answer surprised her in. The Dominion debts were always repaid one way or another if he didn't expect. Something then. What was his angle, you assume? I won't kill you the moment. I'm strong enough, she continued. Hayes finally looked up, meeting her gaze. His expression was unreadable, but there was no fear in his eyes. I know you won't, he said. Khazar stiffened. You are a fool. Maybe, he admitted, but you don't owe those bastards anything, do you? The words hit harder than she expected. He was right. The Dominion had left her to die. Her own kind had turned their backs on her, and yet part of her still felt the instinct to defend them, to uphold the warrior code. Survival of the strongest. The weak are left behind. She should hate humans. She should want to rip out this one's throat, but instead she was sitting here talking to him. Something inside her twisted at the thought. I don't trust you, she said. Hayes nodded. Fair. I don't trust you either. Yet here they were sharing shelter, breathing the same air, fighting the same cold. Khazari looked down at her own hands, flexing them slowly. They no longer trembled. Strength was returning. Slowly but surely she needed to decide what came next. Hayes went back to his rifle, but his next words were soft. You're not my prisoner, Khazar. The sound of her name on his lips startled her. No human had ever spoken it before, not like that. She forced herself to remain calm. Then what am I? Hayes didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter, thoughtful, alive. That was not the answer she expected, but perhaps it was the only one that mattered. A different kind of strength. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Khazari closed her eyes for a moment, listening. The battle was getting closer. She was injured, but she was not helpless. She could still fight. I need a weapon, she said at last. Hayes glanced at her. You planning to shoot me in the back? Khazari let out a low growl. If I wanted you dead, you would not have woken up. Hayes chuckled. Sure. But after a moment, he pulled a knife from his belt and tossed it toward her. She caught at midair, fingers closing around the hilt. It was crude, heavier than Zala blades, but balanced. The test. She looked at him, meeting his gaze. You trust too easily, Hayes smirked, and you don't trust at all. Neither of them looked away. Perhaps that was a problem, or perhaps it was the beginning of something else, something dangerous, something that could change everything. The enemy returns. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and blood. Khazar gripped the human knife tightly, feeling its weight in her palm. It was different from the energy-forged weapons of her people, cruder, heavier, made for brutality rather than precision. But a blade was a blade. A weapon was a weapon, and she needed one. Hayes sat across from, checking the ammunition in his rifle. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his movements. Something had changed. Khazar had heard it to. The battle was moving closer. The distant gunfire that had once been no more than background noise was now distinct, sharp bursts of sound echoing across the wasteland. The occasional thud of artillery shook the ground beneath them. Something was coming. Khazar glanced toward the jagged opening in the wreckage that served as her shelter. The sky beyond was dark, thick with storm clouds, and the smoke of war lightning flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows over the ruined battlefield. She turned back to Hayes. How long until they find us? He exhaled, slowly rubbing a hand over his face. Not long. Khazar felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear, but from certainty. It wouldn't be the humans who found them first. It would be her own people. A fateful warning. The realization hit her like a blow to the gut. The Dominion would return. They would score the battlefield for survivors, eliminate any remaining humans, and erase all traces of weakness, including her. Khazar clenched her jaw. It should not have surprised her, yet it did. Some small, foolish part of her had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would have sent a rescue team. But the XLFR did not rescue the weak. They erased them. She gripped the knife tighter, forcing herself to focus. If the Dominion found her, they would kill her without hesitation, not just for being wounded, not just for being left behind, but for the crime of survival itself. She turned to Hayes. He had saved her, but he still didn't trust her, not fully. She had to make him understand. My people are coming, she said. Hayes didn't react right away. He finished loading his rifle, then glanced at her with measured eyes. You sure? Khazar nodded. They will not leave bodies behind. They will not leave survivors. They will cleanse the battlefield of all weakness, including me. Hayes studied her for a long moment. He was weighing her words, judging her Intentions, why tell me, he asked. Finally, you could just wait, let them kill me and... Be on your way, Cattery bared her teeth. You assumed they would take me back. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't they shay out a bitter laugh? No, the Dominion does not welcome failures. I was left behind. That means I am already dead too. The understanding flicker in his eyes. Then we're both screwed. Kazari nodded yes. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the sound of distant marching grew louder. Heavy boots, precision, disciplined Zelfar soldiers they were. Running out of time, the decision, Hayes checked his rifle again, then pulled out a small device from his belt, a beacon, probably a distress signal. Kazair tilted her head. What is that? Hayes gave her a grim look, a signal for evac. But there's a problem, of course. There is. Hayes ignored her sarcasm. My unit had a fallback point 10 clicks west. If they got my signal, they might send someone. He hesitated. Mike Carey's mind raced. 10 clicks was far too far with her injuries. Too far with Dominion forces closing, and we will never make it, she said flatly. Hayes smirked. That's the spirit, she growled. I am being realistic. He shook his head. Now you're giving up before we even tried. Kazuri bristled, but said nothing. She hated how easily he spoke, as if survival was simply a matter of determination. He didn't understand. He had never lived under the Dominion. She turned away, staring at the flickering fur light. Could they really make it? Her instincts told her no, but she had defied her instincts before. She glanced back at Hayes. Were the odds your people actually come? Hayes shrugged. Better than your people letting you live. That was fair. Kazari took a slow breath, forcing down the doubt. If she stayed, she would die. If she left, she might die anyway, but at least it would be on her own terms. And for some reason, the thought of dying beside a human she barely knew felt less disgraceful than dying at the hands of her own kind. Fine, she said. We run. Hayes grinned. Knew you'd see it my way. He stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. You good to move? Carey pushed herself to her feet, swallowing a grimace of pain. Her body protested, but she ignored it. Weakness was death. Pain was temporary. I will manage, she said. Hayes studied her for a moment, then tossed something her way. She caught it instinctively, a sidearm, a human weapon. Kazari frowned. You trust me with this? Hayes smirked. Not even a little. She snorted, but said nothing. Then together they stepped out into the night. The wind was cold. The battlefield stretched before them, littered with ruins, bodies, and the fading echoes of war. And in the distant shadows moved Zalor soldiers, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Kazari took a deep breath. It was time to see if a human and a traitor could outrun death, and if they couldn't, then she would make sure they at least took a few bastards down with them. The battle of loyalty. The battlefield stretched before them like a living nightmare. Broken structures, wreckage, and craters from artillery. The scent of burned metal, scorched earth, and blood clung to the air as if the land itself was stained by the violence of war. The distant echoes of gunfire had become a steady hum, a constant reminder of the battle still raging in the heart of the war-torn city. The XL far were closing, and Kazair felt the weight of the sidearm at her hip, its cold metal surface, a reminder that she was still, in the eyes of her people, a traitor, but in her mind a more pressing concern was the human at her side. She had agreed to join him to escape certain death, but this wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was about her own soul, the very core of her identity. She had sworn loyalty to the Dominion. She had fought for it, blood for it, killed for it. But now, with each passing second, she found herself questioning everything. The soldiers of the Dominion had left her die. They had discarded her like garbage. But this human, Sir Daniel Hayes, had offered her a chance to defy everything she had ever been taught, everything she had ever believed. Did she have the strength to walk away from everything she knew? The distant hum of approaching cellar soldiers snapped her out of her thoughts. She scanned the horizon, her sharp eyes catching the glint of their weapons in the twilight. Too many of them, even with the human at her side. They didn't stand a chance. Ready, Hay F, his voice low but steady. Eyes narrowed as he checked his rifle, and nodded, her heart pounding. She had fought many battles in her life, battles with the Dominion, battles for survival. But this was different. This time it wasn't just her own life on the line. This is what you want? Carey asked, quietly, her voice rough from the strain of speaking. Hayes glanced at her eyes. Hard, but not unkind. I'm not in the habit a bit of running from fights. Kosary, she swallowed hard. This was that there would be no turning back after this. The XLFR would never forgive her, but at least she wasn't running from this fight alone. Suddenly the silence was broken by the whine of hovercrafts overhead, cutting to the haze of smoke. Zelfar Reinforcements of sound was unmistakable. She felt her heart race as she snapped into action, checking her. Weapon one last time Hayes moved fast. He crouched low, signaling her to follow as he made his way toward the wreckage of a nearby building, his movement swift, and sure Carrie matched his pace to pain in, her side flaring with each step, but she ignored it. She had no time to slow down. Now you stick close, Hayes muttered. Stay low, Kaiser nodded, even as the familiar rush of adrenaline hit her veins. She had been trained TR for moments like this. Trained to kill with precision, to outlast the enemy, and to strike fear into the hearts of those who dared to challenge her. The XLFAR had made her into a weapon, but now that weapon was being used against her own. As they approached the wreckage, they ducked into the shadows, eyes scanning the area. The XLFAR soldiers were closing in there. Disciplined formations, moving with precision. Carrie's heart clenched. Her people once she had fought beside them, once she had trusted them, but now they were enemies. This is it, Hay said, pulling her back into the shadows as the first cellar soldier passed by. Unaware of their presence, he crouched down, signaling her to stay still. She could feel the tension radiating from him. He was not afraid, but focused, completely in control. A brief moment of stillness passed before the sound of screaming cut through the air. One of the XLFAR soldiers had spotted a small human scout team caught off guard and out of position. The ensuing firefight was brutal, with blinding flashes of gunfire illuminating the darkened battlefield. Carrie's instincts took over. Without thinking, she drew the human sidearm, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She stepped out of the shadows, firing with deadly accuracy. The first cellar soldier dropped in. Second to second, never had a chance to react. She moved swiftly, each shot a reminder of what she had once been, a warrior, a killing machine beside her. Hayes fired his rifle, his shots landing with precision. The two of them moved in a synchronized rhythm, a human and an XLFAR fighting together against a common enemy. Despite the chaos around them, they were a team. Kazue moved with lethal grace, her mind blank, focusing only on the target. She had never worked with another being like this before, never trusted anyone, but Hayes was proving to her that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to rely on someone else to work. Together, the XLR soldiers, trained and disciplined, fought back fiercely, but they were not prepared for this Khazarian. Hayes moved as one, their partnership forming almost instinctively. She covered him as he reloaded. He covered her when her gun jammed. It was a dance of survival, a strange and beautiful thing. As the last Zalor soldier fell, Hayes let out a slow breath. Khazari stood still, scanning the battlefield, waiting for the next wave to come, but for now they had won this skirmish. Khazar looked at him, her chest heaving with exertion. This isn't how I thought I'd go down, she said quietly. Hayes didn't smile, but his eyes softened for a moment. We're not dead yet. Khazar met his gaze, feeling the strange pull of something more than mere survival between them. And in that moment, she understood loyalty was not a burden. It was a choice of warriors. Justice. The battlefield was still for the moment, but Carrie knew it wouldn't last. She could feel it in her bones. The calm before the storm. The XLFAR would regroup, and they would come for her. She had betrayed them. But today it wasn't just about betrayal. Today was about justice, her justice. The human Hayes moved beside her, scanning the area, always alert. She noticed how he moved with purpose now, his confidence growing with each passing minute. But there was something different about his movements today, a quiet tension, a sense of urgency in his every step. He had been right by her side in the heat of battle, but now a moment of silence had fallen between them. They were on the edge of something. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Carrie's heart pounded in her chest, her mind fixated on one thing. Vase, at the thought of him, her former commander, made her blood run cold. She had once followed him, trusted him, believed in him, but now, after everything, she could only see him for what he was, a coward. She knew that Vasek and the other Jellar officers would be close somewhere among the reinforcements. They would not have gone far. She could still hear the distant hum of their hovercraft, their engines kicking up dust and debris as they advanced. Hayes. Carrie spoke low, her voice steady, but filled with something darker. Now I need to finish this. He glanced at her, a frown crossing his face. Finish what, Vasek? She said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. He's the one who abandoned me. He's the one who left me to die. I will not let him walk away from this. Hayes didn't respond immediately, and Carrie could see the conflict in his eyes. She had seen that look before, the hesitation before taking a life, but to her this wasn't hesitation. It was something more. It was The choice of justice, a choice that only the strong could make. I'm not asking for your approval, she added VO tight. I'm asking for your help. Hayes didn't flinch. At the words, he simply nodded, but she saw the caution in his eyes. You sure about this? Kazari didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked out over the desolate battlefield where the shadows of the HFY soldiers still moved in the distance. The destruction around found her once a reminder of the human enemy was now something else. It was a reminder of her past, of everything she had given and everything she had lost. I've never been more certain of anything, she finally said. Without another word, they moved forward, weaving between the ruins and wreckage. The human beside her moved with a silent grace, but Carrie could tell he was alert. He was already anticipating the danger she had come to appreciate. His instinct, the way he moved without hesitation, the way he adapted to every battle they fought together. Still, this was different. This wasn't a fight for survival. This was a fight for personal redemption. The chase. Kesser's heart raced as they approached the area where she had last seen Vasek. He would be close, coordinating with his forces. She could almost feel his presence, like a cold weight pressing down on her chest. He was the leader, the one who had declared that she wasn't strong enough to survive, that she was a weakling unworthy of the Dominion's future, the one who had abandoned her to die in the ruins of a battlefield. Hayes was quiet as they advanced, his movements almost ghost-like. Kazari felt an odd sense of companionship with him, an unlikely partnership forged in the fires of battle. She wanted to push him away to stay focused on the task at hand, but she couldn't deny the truth they were in this together. Now ahead of them, the sound of voices reached her ears, the unmistakable commands of cellar officers. She could feel her heart beating faster. Each thought of her pulse a reminder of what she had to do. Wait, Hayes whispered, his voice barely audible. They crouched behind a large piece of wreckage, listening to the distant voices. Kazair strained to hear, trying to make sense of the words. Vasek was there. She could feel it. He was close. She glanced over at Hayes, who gave a SLE nod. He knew they both understood now that the time for stealth was over. She had been betrayed by her own kind. There would be no mercy for them. With a silent signal, they moved forward again, slipping through the debris and shadows. Every step brought them closer to their target. They were nearly there, just a few more meters, and then it happened. The unmistakable figure of Vasek appeared in the distance, flanked by several other soldiers. His back was turned, and Carrie felt the rage surge through her chest, every fiber of her being screamed for justice, for revenge. She had been marked as weak by this man, but now he was vulnerable. Now he was the one who was weak. Without a word, she broke from cover, charging toward him. The sound of her movement was Eunice Abel, and Vasek turned, eyes wide in shock. Kazari, he shouted, his voice full of disbelief. What are you doing? But Carrie didn't need his words. She had heard enough. With a growl, she closed the distance between them in seconds, a blade of her sidearm drawn and shining with deadly intent. As she reached him, she didn't hesitate. The HFY commander raised his weapon, but it was already too late. In a single fluid motion, Kazar drove the blade deep into his chest, piercing the armor, reaching for the heart. Within, the look of shock in his eyes was the last thing she saw before he crumpled to the ground. The aftermath. Kateri stood over him, her chest heaving, her mind racing. She had done it. She had finally avenged herself. But it didn't feel like victory. Vasek had been a symbol of everything that was wrong with her people, their cold, unfeeling loyalty to a system that valued strength above all else. Without compassion, she had broken free from it. Yes, but in doing so, she had severed something deep inside her, something she couldn't name. Behind her, Hayes watched silently. He said nothing he didn't need. Takazair felt his presence as a quiet, steady weight at her back. They had won. But at what cost? What was left of her, of who she had been for the first time? She didn't have an answer, but she had the rest of her life to find it a new path. The wind had begun to pick up as the last remnants of the battle faded into silence. The battlefield, once alive with the crack of gunfire and the hum of hovering craft, now lay still and quiet, save for the distant rumble of collapsing structures and the whispers of wind between the ruins. Kazari stood alone at the edge of what had once been a thriving city, her gaze sweeping over the wreckage, over the bodies of far soldiers and humans alike. It felt surreal. All the destruction, the bloodshed, the choices. Had it all been worth it? She glanced down at her hands, which were still stained with Bozik's blood. There had been no satisfaction in the kill. She had acted out of rage, yes, out of a need for justice, but the cold emptiness that had followed, that gnawing sense of something lost, was Something she couldn't ignore. The Dominion, the Empire she had once pulled for, had shattered in an instant, and now, with its leader dead at her feet, there was nothing left to return beside her. Hayes was quiet. He had been with her through it all, through the chaos, the battle, betrayal, but in this moment, he said nothing he didn't need to. There was an understanding between them. They both knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about what came next, what kind of life they would. Choose to live, you killed him, Hayes said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, but there was no judgment in it, only something else. Understanding. Carrie didn't reply immediately. Instead, she looked out over the horizon, at the distant lines of smoke rising from the ruins of the city. It had been a final act of defiance, the closing of a chapter. In her life, she had severed ties to the Dominion in a single stroke, cutting away the last remnants of the life she had known. But the cost had been high. What was left of her after all of that? Was there any place for her in this world? I didn't do it for you, she said finally, her voice gruff, distant. Or for anyone else. I did it for me, for the warrior I used to be. Hay, not Edda's gaze shifting toward her, and now Khazir swallowed, looking down at her hands. Again, she didn't have an answer. She didn't know what came next. The Dominion was gone, destroyed by her actions and her betrayal, and the humans, the ones who had saved her, had no place for someone like her. She was a Tsar warrior marked by blood and violence. She had betrayed everything she had ever known. The very heart of her identity had been crushed when Vasek had left her die, and yet standing here now, she couldn't help but wonder whether there was more. What happens now? She asked quietly. Almost to herself. Hayes studied her for a moment, then took a step closer, his eyes steady. Now, we keep moving. There's always another fight, always another battle, but maybe this time it's a fight worth fighting. Khazir looked up at him, her expression unreadable. And you think I'm worth fighting for? Hay didn't flinch. You're worth something, Khazir. You've earned that much. For a moment, Khazir just stared at him. He didn't look away. There was no pity in his eyes, no doubt. It was something she hadn't expected. Acceptance. Kateri swallowed the lump in her throat. She had been raised to never accept weakness, to trust only in herself, to fight until there was nothing left to give. And yet here she was facing the human who had given her a chance to live, and for what? To fight again, to become part of a world she barely understood. She had always believed that her strength came from her loyalty to the Dominion, that her purpose was defined by that allegiance. But now she was adrift. Who was she without the Dominion? Who was she without war? I don't belong with the humans, she said at last, her voice quieter than before. I'm not one of you. Hayes gave a short laugh. No, you're not. But then you've never been like the rest of us, have you? Kazu's brow furrowed. What do you mean, you think? You're some broken thing, Hayes said, his voice gentle, but firm. A warrior without a cause. But that's not true. You're still alive, and that means you have a future. Maybe not the one you expected, but it's a future nonetheless. Kaveri shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You think I can just forget everything? No, he said quietly. She looked at Hayes, then her eyes softening ever so slightly. What now, Surgeon? Hayes smiled, his gaze steady. Now we rebuild together. Khazir didn't apply at first. Instead, she turned toward the horizon, watching the remnants of the battle fade into the distance for the first time in a long while. She didn't feel the crushing weight of the past pressing down on her. There was something else now, a quiet promise in the air, a sense that perhaps she wasn't alone. We rebuild, she repeated softly. Together the wind swept through the ruins, carrying with it the promise of something new. And for the first time, because Aurora allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future, perhaps the war was over, but the fight for her own redemption, her own new path, was just beginning.